Hello, everyone. My name is Emil Lurch, and today I want to talk to you about securing your software development lifecycle with a combination of tools that we have at AWS. So Amazon Q Developer, Inspector, Code Guru Security, to be able to bring AI into detecting and fixing your anything with your software as you develop it and deploy it and operate it in production. So we're really looking at how we can improve our security posture as we look across the software development lifecycle. So my name is Emil Lurch. I'm a principal go-to-market specialist with AWS, focused on our development tools and on Q developers specifically. And with me today, later you'll see Casey Lee, who is a development engineer within AWS. So there's a number of things we're going to cover today. First and foremost, just want to kind of level set everybody on the software development lifecycle and how we can add security into that. Then I'll talk a lot about Q Developer, provide an overview. There's been a number of announcements this week that I will also kind of go over, and how we see that Q Developer assisting you throughout the software development lifecycle. Next, we'll talk about code security scanning. So within the IDE and outside the IDE, as we move code from the core development piece into our CI systems, our source control systems, and into production. And then Casey will talk a lot about maintaining that secure code with Inspector after deployment has actually happened. So let's get started. First, software development lifecycle. So there's a number of ways that our customers put together a set of pipelines to move code into production. We also have to ideate on that code. We have to figure out exactly what we want to do, and then write the code, put that into source control system, and then have our pipelines measure, inspect, test it, and put it into production. So all of this really starts with the human element, planning on how we're going to approach a particular problem. What is it that we actually want to do with our applications? And as we think about security, we want to shift left, as it were, as much as we can. So physically on the slide, you'll see this is on the left, but as we're thinking about our requirements for our software, we want to think about that with a security first mindset. And then as we do the actual architecture design and development, we want to also have security as top of mind as we go through those particular operations. So this is where Q Developer first really comes in, is in that stage of requirements gathering, design, and then building directly within the IDE. If folks are security professionals here, you can say, well, this is a developer on their laptop. I don't have full control over that environment, and so I want more control to be able to make sure that the code that is going into our company's systems into production is secure. So after the code leaves the laptop, that's where I really want to take over, and that's where we have assistants that help with the rest of this process. So code goes into our source code repository, and then at that point, we want to apply our security checks. So Code Guru Security, Amazon Inspector, to do software composition analysis, static application software analysis, and make sure that the code is that we've been writing and the code that we're dependent upon in terms of libraries, dependencies, is secure at that point. So the code's now in the source code repository. We want to deploy that into production, right? So we might use AWS Code Pipeline, AWS Code Build. We might be using GitLab, CI/CD. We might be using GitHub Actions, but we have some process that we want to use to take this code, build it, and then deploy it. And we want that process to be secure. And when we deploy it, we're not done. Because even though we've tested the code, as we did the authoring, we tested the code after it's been authored and through the pipeline, now we're in production, and there might be things that come up after it gets deployed in production. We have software that's dependent upon libraries. Those libraries may have vulnerabilities that are discovered after the fact. And so we want to make sure that we're continuously scanning our code even after it's been deployed, such that when a new vulnerability is discovered, we have some visibility into that. And that's where Amazon Inspector comes in, to have that continuous scanning and then surface those any findings that it discovers through a central management infrastructure that our security teams can be looking at, right? So you can see here we have AWS Security Hub with the security teams that are viewing those particular findings. So that's the full overview, and the rest of this hour is really going to be getting into the details of each one of those. So starting with the authoring, the ideation, learning what we want to change and how we change it, this is where Amazon Q really gets started. So our goal for Amazon Q Developer is to assist in across the SDLC. The software development lifecycle as a whole is really what we're focused on. Some folks think about Q Developer, and we talk a lot about all the capabilities that Q Developer has in the IDE, but the North Star for AWS is really accelerating the entire process. So that begins with that planning phase, where Q Developer can come in and you have an understanding of what it is that the change that you want to make to the system or the new system that you want to build. We need to be able to architect that with best practices in mind, create our detailed level designs, again, with best practices. And so we have Q Developer there within the AWS documentation, within the AWS console, which is nice because it has the context within the console of the AWS account that you have and the infrastructure that's there. So you can ask it account-specific questions that are germane to the problem that you're trying to solve. We released last week or two some enhancements for Q Developer for billing, for instance. We've got the ability to ask about particular pieces of your infrastructure, and so you can start to now ask questions about, okay, so how many EC2 instances are we using versus containers versus Lambda? Like, let's conform to the way that our company is building software, other pieces of software, to have a consistent architecture. We can use that as input if we're using EC2. Maybe we look at what instance sizes are appropriate. And so Q Developer can help with that type of activity as well. And then outside the console, now we have an understanding of where we want to take this. Let's look at the existing code that we have in front of us. If we're making a modification, maybe I'm a new employee, or maybe this is a new code base for me, or maybe the last change that we made to this code base was a year ago. I need some refreshers on exactly what's going on in here, what patterns were being used, how has the software been architected. So I can use Q at that point to really dig into the details and explain to me what it is that I have in front of me, so that I can be effective when I'm ready to make that change. So getting into the creation phase, Q developer, at that point we're most often in the IDE, but we might also be using the command line interface. And with Q developer in the CLI, we can have suggestions for how to do things directly in that area. And there's a number of different things, some of which were announced even 2 days ago in Matt Garman's keynote, around being able to do things like creation of readmes with /doc, right? So I can, as part of that explanation phase, we might need this might be a code base that doesn't even have a README. Maybe there is an existing README, but it's not up to date, so I can update that file as well. So there's new things that we're bringing in to Q Developer all the time to help us with that act of creation, and in multiple different styles. So as I'm writing code in the IDE, it can be providing me with suggestions. I can also engage in conversational coding by engaging with a chat interface that's on the left-hand side of my IDE, or maybe the inline chat that we released a little while ago, to be able to ask questions and then get to some code that I want to insert directly at the place where I'm having that chat conversation. Last but certainly not least is the feature development aspect. So within Q Developer, you can go into the chat and actually invoke when the command is /dev. You type /dev and then you provide it with a set of requirements. Once you provide those requirements, and you can have it create the entire feature, the code, the documentation, the tests, all as a single unit to really accelerate your development. So this is really helpful for brand new features or new applications to give you a jump start on that creation process. Once code is there, we need to test it. We need to make sure it's secure. So Q Developer is there doing continuous scans of that code to make sure that we are writing secure code along the way. We have a new command that we introduced at the keynote on Tuesday called /test, which is specialized in unit test generation. But there's a number of different ways within Q Developer that you can create unit tests. You can create them through the inline suggestions as you're typing. You start to describe your test, and it will create that test for you. The inline chat, the chat that's on the side of the IDE. Or you can actually use the software development agent, the feature creation, to, instead of creating a feature, create me all the tests for this project, and it can kind of do that as well. Unit test generation feature is specific to test generation, and so that's a great way to engage with Q for that particular aspect. Once your code is written and tested, you also want to do a full code review, and we'll see a demo of that a little later in this hour, and how that looks when you're reviewing. It reviews for both for security, but it also reviews for suboptimal code that might be confusing or hard to read. Maybe there's logic errors in the code that it can also start to help you find and more importantly fix. So when you run into reported issues through the code review feature, again announced on Tuesday, was when you see those issues, you can actually generate fixes directly within that interface. And we'll see that today. We write the code, we get it deployed, but we also need to operate that code. And so Q Developer is there to help out with troubleshooting errors. This is most often in the console, where you see maybe one EC2 instance can't reach another EC2 instance, and so we might be asking the question, why is that? Help me debug that. Or we might see issues with running Lambda functions, and a QDeveloper can suggest fixes there as well. So we have QDeveloper embedded throughout the console to be able to help you in various areas, S3, Lambda, as I mentioned, EC2, EKS, to be able to help with that. On Tuesday, we announced a preview of Amazon QDeveloper investigations. So investigations is a way that we can use the power of generative AI to review your operational logs and then be able to provide hypothesis on root cause for operational issues that have occurred. And so as an operator or as a developer that's looking at my running system, I can go ahead and use investigations to quickly kind of summarize what I'm seeing in production and be able to respond to that. So this is a really powerful feature that I'm excited to see our customers have some success with. Well, we're not done, because once we have operational code, it's been there for a while, we may need to upgrade it to a new version of a framework or a new version of a language. So QDeveloper is there in terms of transform. So Q transforms for Java to go from Java 8 to Java 17 today, and our announcement on Tuesday for .NET to upgrade our .NET code that's in preview. These are the types of things that we're looking at and trying to offer for customers to be able to quickly upgrade their systems, maintain, modernize their code base as time moves on. Take away some of that undifferentiated heavy lifting of something like a Java 8 to Java 17. All right. So that's a quick overview of kind of where we're going for QDeveloper specifically. But I mentioned this slash review that we announced on Tuesday, and we've all been busy at the conference. Many of us have probably not seen this. So this is what it looks like. So after, in this case, I've done a review on a project. I'm looking at a particular issue, and I see that QDeveloper is actually telling me, a lot of details about the issue that I've seen. This isn't my code. Maybe there's a bug. Every time I run it on my code, it comes out perfect, but I guess that's just my code. I'm not sure. But this is Open Sudoku, which is an open source project on GitHub that I ran slash review on. And it actually didn't find too much, and it's older, several versions back. So, I'm sure that a lot of these have been addressed. But in this code base, I ran QDeveloper review on this, and we saw a couple different issues. In this particular case, we see that in Android development, you start up an application and Android software works on intents. There may not be a default intent, so this is basically you're not handling null. But we can generate the fix, and I actually have a demo of this that I'll show in a minute, but I thought it was useful to provide kind of the end result here. So we're providing kind of a summary of all the things that QDeveloper review has found in this code base. There's a mix here of some things that are pretty deterministic, like you're missing this particular kind of check. There's some things that are, hey, my cyclomatic complexity is too high, and if you are familiar with that particular metric, it's effectively, cyclomatic complexity is effectively a measure of how confusing your code is. You've got a bunch of different different if statements and conditions, and that those conditions can be confusing to a developer as they're reading and then trying to make a change to a particular code base. So QDeveloper can detect those types of things and then suggest ways to make your code simpler while still accomplishing the end goal. So there's a number of different things that review is actually checking for in terms of optimizing and securing the code. We've got a summary that we have in the chat on the bottom left, and then in the middle is our code base, right? Which I've left the code there because it's actually highlighting the particular issue that review found in the details on the right. So I've got my code, I've got the details, I can read through a clear explanation of exactly what QDeveloper found, and then I've got action buttons on the bottom to be able to generate the fix, regenerate a fix, if we want a different opinion from the LLM on how this should be addressed. I can do that regeneration. I can also explain more about what's going on, and that will be in the video that I show in a minute. Or I can say, hey, I think this is actually okay. I'm going to go ahead and accept it. So I'll ignore this particular issue. Okay. All right. So here's the video. So when I start this, you'll see. I'm going to go in and I've got the project loaded in the workspace. I don't have anything open though. I'm going to start to engage with QDeveloper. We have these / commands, so I'll use /review to instantiate the review process. It's asking me here if I want to generate it for the whole project or just the open file. I'm looking at the whole project. So I'll go ahead and ask it to do the review of the workspace as a whole. And it'll take a little while. I clipped out a little bit of time in this particular video, but it can take a minute or two, or a few seconds, and then it's going to provide me with that summary that we saw on the screenshot, showing you some of the issues here. One of them is a resource leak. Here I've got a database that I'm opening up, and then you'll see that a few lines down there's a close, but in the middle there's a condition where I could return from the function without closing that database. So this is what QDeveloper is trying to tell me, like, hey, there's a problem here. So I've asked it to explain what's going on. So it's generating in this chat an explanation of all of this entire problem and what to do about it. So I get a quick overview of resource management and why it's important to close things, and then a couple different options, because there could be more than one way depending on the design of this database object that I'm interacting with. There could be more than one way to make sure that the resource is always closed out. And then a few key points at the end to continue. So we're trying to teach the developer as we move forward. As you're creating more code, you just keep this stuff in mind when the new code is written. So looking at a couple different other issues, this is the one that we kind of started with. This is my intent that might be null. I'm going to go ahead and view the details, which pops up that other screen that we saw earlier, and then go ahead and generate the fix. I did not clip anything out from this, so this is exactly how long this particular generation takes. We'll see it's only a few seconds in this case, and we'll see a potential fix. And then at that point, I can accept the fix, ignore it, regenerate, or I can open up the diff, which is going to show me exactly what will happen when I hit accept the fix. So this is kind of, the yellow highlights are the new code that it's proposing I put in. I will go ahead and accept that fix, and when I scroll down on the file, I'll see that, sure enough, my file's modified. Those two new lines are now there to put a null check, basically, in that particular area. So that's what the Q developer review looks like in the IDE. But there's one other announcement that I haven't talked about that was done on Tuesday, and it was a fairly momentous announcement for Q developer because of what I showed earlier in terms of this secure SDLC. We want to be able to also initiate these reviews inside our source control systems. So our partnership with GitLab now enables us to have Q developer in the GitLab environment so that whether it's a developer or some other project member, maybe a security analyst, wants to do a review, they can, using Q developer, they can initiate that directly in GitLab and have a similar experience to what we just saw. So have to apologize a little bit for this video flashes a little bit, so just if you're a little photosensitive, you might be aware of that. But this is in the GitLab environment. We've got a merge request. At this point, the developer has written code and wants to issue this merge request. If you're not familiar with GitLab, and you are familiar with GitHub, merge request and a pull request are from GitHub are fairly synonymous. So I'm going to create that merge request. Once I create the merge request, at that point, just as in many other source control systems, I have the ability to comment on that merge request. And so what we'll see in a second when I play the video is that we will comment on the merge request and then try to assign that comment to Q to, hey, I'm commenting here, to ask Q to do a review. So I'll go ahead and play this. We'll now create the merge request. And then after I click this button, we'll see the screen with the merge request come up. And then that screen will have the activity where I can now go in and ask Q to do a review of the code. So by typing /Q, I'm now kind of engaging with the Amazon Q service. I'll ask for that review again. And after I hit the comment, we'll let some passage of time happen, and then we'll see the Q service comment with kind of status. So you'll see several comments kind of come in here to say, hey, I've received your request, I'm reviewing the code, the review is complete, and I found an issue. In this case, it's a potential SQL injection vector that you really don't want to concatenate strings. I want to use prepared statements. So it's again giving me kind of that description, but now this is like captured for anybody in the project team to see at any time. It's part of the project history, and so we can see kind of the provenance of all the changes that have been made and why they were made. So in this case, okay, now I agree with Q developer's assessment. I'm going to invoke Q again and say, can you go fix this for me? Like, that'd be nice. So we're going to fix that, or ask Q to fix it. And when we add that comment, the Q service will go back and generate that fix and suggest changes directly to the merge request that again we can review and decide whether or not we want to accept. So we'll scroll down here. We'll see the diff. It's going to take out that string concatenation that we saw earlier, and it's going to replace it with the new code that's using a SQL prepared statement. That and for those that aren't familiar, if you use a SQL prepared statement, those are not vulnerable to SQL injection attacks. So we've got the user ID equals question mark. That's our parameter, and then down below we see the set string statement.setString, which is assigning the user variable into that statement. So this looks good. We're going to apply that suggestion, and then at that point, we're free to accept the merge request or continue with other human-aided reviews. So once we get through the creation and into our source control system, Now we want to deploy that code, and that's where we start turning from Amazon Q Developer to some of the other tools that AWS provides for secure scanning of code. Predominantly, this is Code Guru Security as the next stage in that secure software development lifecycle. So here's the same picture we saw earlier, but Code Guru Security is embedded throughout that. Code Guru Security is actually one of the components that we're leveraging within Q Developer for that review. It's not the only thing, but it is part of that. And so Q Developer is using it, Inspector is using it, and then we can use it directly within our CI/CD pipelines, within code build, within code pipeline. If you have GitHub Actions or you're using GitLab CI, we have documented integration for Code Guru Security into each one of those. And then we can see a full visibility of these security vulnerabilities specifically for static analysis of our code throughout the entire life cycle. Code Guru Security, when you can invoke it on specific code that's in a repository or in S3, and when you do that, you can see any of your findings on the Code Guru dashboard that is within the AWS console. So here is a picture of what that looks like. We have here some hard-coded credentials we found in our code, and at that point we can get an explanation of what that looks like, and then go back into our editor of choice and take care of that issue. Within CI/CD, we want to be able to potentially block on different finding levels. So in this particular case, I've got GitLab CI. This is an example of GitLab CI. And here we're using the Code Guru Security image, and we've decided to fail on security level critical. So that's super useful for test environments, but when you get into staging and production environments, you might want to crank that down. So now I'm failing on different security levels, so I don't want any medium or higher vulnerabilities being pushed into production, for instance, but maybe staging, I relax that a little bit and allow medium but not higher critical. I have the flexibility to do that within Code Guru Security. So we've written the code, we've reviewed the code in our source control system, and then we've had security reviews throughout the pipeline to push this into production. So once we get into production, now we want to start talking about Amazon Inspector. And for Amazon Inspector, I'll invite my colleague, Casey Lee, up here, and he'll take you through what that looks like.
Emil. All right, so Emil gave us some great techniques that we can use to secure our software development lifecycle early on in the developer's workstation, in their IDE, get very fast feedback early and often. We also saw how we could secure inside the CI/CD pipeline, inside our source management system. And so these are great techniques that help give us confidence that our software is ready to deploy and operate. But the problem is our software development lifecycle does not end at deploy time, right? It's only just getting started. Most of the time is now going to be running this software. And so what we really need is a mechanism where we can continuously validate that our software is still meeting our security requirements and is free of vulnerabilities. And this is where Amazon Inspector comes in. Amazon Inspector is a service that continuously monitors your software in your account, in your organization, continuously looking for vulnerabilities. New vulnerabilities get found all the time, and even though your software was free of vulnerabilities when you deploy it, days, weeks, months later, new vulnerabilities could come out either with packages that you're running in your infrastructure or in third-party libraries that your software is using. And so what we have now is this ability to continuously monitor wherever you run compute. This could be in EC2, this could be in Lambda, this could be in containerized workloads with ECS or EKS. And so in all of these cases, we're able to quickly and easily turn on Inspector and configure it for which of those different compute that we like to run our workloads in. And the other nice thing is that once you turn this on in your organization or in your account, you get very clear, contextualized details on when a vulnerability is found. It's going to tell you which account the resource is in, which region, which type of resource. We're talking about, is this a Docker image in an ECR repository? Is this a Lambda function? Is this an EC2 instance that has a vulnerability in it? You'll also get detailed information about the severity of the vulnerability, details about the package that has the vulnerability, and details on the CV that's included with it. The other nice thing that Inspector offers is the ability to generate a software bill of materials, or an SBOM. We want to be able to know where all of these dependencies exist inside of our workloads across all of our accounts. So once Inspector's turned on, we could then request an SBOM be generated. And the SBOM can be generated across our whole organization, targeted to a specific account, or targeted all the way down to a specific resource, like one Lambda function or one EC2 instance. The SBOM will be in one of two formats, your choice, either Cyclone DX or SPDX, the two leading standards for SBOM generation. And that will include all of the dependencies, both the OS packages and the software packages. For example, if you're using Java, these would be the jar files that you're dependent on. If you're using JavaScript, the dependencies in your package JSON and so forth. All of those dependencies would be, with the versions, would be clearly enumerated in that SBOM that gets generated. The other nice thing is the SBOM is put in an S3 bucket that you own, which then gives you the ability to interrogate that, and a common pattern is to use something like QuickSight or Athena to query these SBOM files to answer the question, where in my organization is this specific third-party dependency being run? And so if you have something you're trying to find, there's some concerning CVE that you became aware of, you could run the query against the SBOMs that you generated and know exactly where in your organization those resources are running. The last nice thing about this is there's no additional charge for SBOM generation. It's included with the use of Inspector. We can also add Inspector SBOM generation into our CI/CD pipelines. So here's an example of a GitHub workflow. There's a specific job that is going to generate the SBOM for us. And the first thing that we'll see is that we need to configure our AWS credentials. We need to be able to talk to whichever account Inspector is currently configured in so that we have a place to send those vulnerabilities to. And so in this case, we're using the prepackaged configure AWS credentials GitHub action provided and managed by AWS. It's using OpenID Connect to assume a role that you manage inside your account. And you just need to make sure that that role, in this case called sample role, that role has the necessary access into Inspector to be able to send those vulnerabilities and run the scan. The next step in the job is to actually run the scan with Inspector. And it's using this action provided by AWS called vulnerability scan GitHub action for Amazon Inspector. You'll want to copy and paste that. And that action is going to take the code, send it up to Inspector, generate the SBOM with all of the dependencies included in it, and then make that available to other steps in the job. You'll also notice that there's a couple specific configurations with this action. The first is we configure the artifact type as repository. What that's saying is scan all of the code in the current Git repo that this action is running for. You have a couple other options here. You could choose archive, in which case you could point it at a specific file, like a zip file or a WAR file or a jar file, and it would perform the scan against that artifact and looking at what dependencies exist inside of it. You could also choose a container if you want to point it at an OCI image that was just created in this build process, and it would look at the dependencies that are defined inside that OCI image. And you can also choose binary. If you're using Golang or Rust, you can point it at the binary that you just built, and it would generate an SBOM for the dependencies that were used to build that binary. The other nice thing that we have here is this is another chance to fail the build if vulnerabilities are found. And so I've configured the thresholds for critical, high, and medium of 1. And what that means is if we have one or more critical, high, or medium level CVE that's found in any of the dependencies that were found in this SBOM generation, then the build would fail right there. So we'll get the SBOM, but then we'll also fail the build, stop the line, and end there. And then you could see in the other steps here, we're just going to output the SBOM to review inside of the log file, but you probably want to do something more permanent with that, store the SBOM for later consumption. And then one last thing that's kind of nice with this action is it will generate an action summary inside of GitHub Workflow with a nice display of all of the different vulnerabilities that were found during the use of that action. That's visible on the right there. Okay, so let's talk about how we actually enable Inspector in our organization. So the first thing that's nice is this can be done at the organization level. We could have a single delegated account that is responsible for all the configuration across our accounts. In that account, we would then be able to turn on scanning of whichever compute we're interested in, whether that's Amazon EC2, AWS Lambda, or container services on ECS or EKS, assuming they're using ECR. So let's dig into the EC2 scenario first. When we want to run continuous scans with Inspector on EC2, we have two options. There's the classic option, which is an agent-based scan. And with this mode, you have to install the SSM agent on your EC2 instance. And then you have to configure the SSM agent to be connected to Amazon Systems Manager and sending inventory data to Systems Manager. So this requires a few things. We've got to install the agent. We have to make sure the agent's running. We have to make sure the EC2 instance has an instance profile with a role that has permissions to talk to SSM. And we need to make sure there's network connectivity between the instance and the SSM service. Assuming all that's good, then the agent-based mode works great and has been for quite some time. But recently, there's another option, the hybrid scan mode. And this is pretty cool because it helps with certain workloads that maybe customers don't want to give that IAM permissions to, or they don't want network connectivity, or they don't even want to install the SSM agent on. In any of those scenarios, you can enable the hybrid scan mode in the Inspector console. And when it does that, the first thing is it tries the agent mode. If there's already an agent running on your EC2 instance, it continues with that approach, no change. However, if the EC2 instance is not registered in sending inventory data to SSM, then Inspector will fall back to this agentless mode. And in the agentless mode, what happens is Inspector will create a snapshot of your EBS volume, and it will then perform the scan against that snapshot. The snapshot never leaves your account, and the snapshot is cleaned up after the scan is complete. But this is a really nice way for customers to be able to use Inspector in situations where they don't want to install the agent, they don't want to configure the IAM permissions, or they don't want the network connectivity back to the SSM service. In both cases, we have Inspector continuously scanning the inventory on the instance. If the inventory changes, there's a new package installed, or if a new CVE is registered with the inspector service, then inspector would create a finding for us. Next, let's talk about Amazon ECR, which is the service that stores OCI images for other services like ECS or EKS to run containerized workloads. ECR, we have two options here for scanning our images. First, there's the basic scanning, and this has nothing to do with inspector. This comes with ECR. It's included, and even inside the basic scanning, you have two options. There was the long-standing open source implementation of the scanning, which was based on the open source project Claire, or there's the newer AWS native method on the basic scanning. Both of those, again, are included with ECR and available now. Those only scan packages at the operating system level. So you have an OCI image, you install some packages. Inside that image, those will get scanned with either of those options in the basic scanning. However, any third-party dependencies that your programming language depends on, whether it's Java, Python, JavaScript, whatever, those would not get scanned and detected in the basic scanning option. The other thing to call out here is that the basic scanning only has two frequencies that you can run the scan on. You can only run it when you first push the image, or you can run it manually at any point. But you don't have that continuous scanning that we were talking about with Inspector. And that's where enhanced scanning comes in. With enhanced scanning, you go into the Inspector console, and you turn on enhanced scanning, at which point all images in your ECR repositories would be scanned by Inspector rather than the included scanning technology that's with ECR. The Inspector scanning will scan both the operating system packages and it will scan the third-party dependencies that your programming language uses. You also have an additional option for scan frequency with Inspector, and that is continuous. You will continuously run scans against your ECR repositories anytime either the image changes or new CVEs are registered with Inspector. Inspector will then rescan your images. You also have a nice feature with this enhanced scanning where you can configure the frequency to only rescan images based on either the push or pull date of the image. And this is helpful to limit how many rescans you're doing inside of your account. So we could say, I only want to rescan images that have been pushed up to ECR within the last 90 days. Maybe older than that, I don't know, I don't care about it. But likewise, I could also say, only scan images that have been pulled within the last week. Only pull images that are actively being pulled and run inside my environment. So these are two different configurations that customers have to be able to control the frequency of these rescans. The last compute platform we need to talk about is Lambda. With Lambda, we also have a couple options here on the scanning methods that we choose. Both of these options, again, are configured inside the Inspector console across our organization. We turn these on. You have the standard scanning, which is only detecting package vulnerabilities in your Lambda functions. So it's looking inside the zip file or the OCI image that you're using for running your Lambdas, and it's only detecting issues at the package level, what your dependencies are for your software. Whereas code scanning, which includes standard scanning, if you turn on code scanning, you're getting both code scanning and standard scanning. If I turn on code scanning, I'm also getting detection of code vulnerabilities in my actual software. For example, the example that Emil was showing earlier with SQL injection would get caught with code scanning as opposed to standard scanning, which is just going to detect vulnerabilities in my third-party dependencies. Another example could be if I'm injecting secrets into my if I'm hard-coding secrets into my application, Inspector would warn on that in the code scanning method and give me advice on how to fix it. In both of these modes, we have suggestions generated, and in the code scanning approach, we see generative AI being used to propose changes to our source code to mitigate the findings that it has. In both cases, we see Inspector is running these scans when we first create the Lambda function. Anytime we update the function with like a new version of the Lambda, or also if any new CVEs or any new code detectors are registered with Inspector, Inspector will automatically rerun against our Lambda function. Another nice thing that Inspector offers is simple integration with Security Hub. And by simple, I mean if you have Security Hub turned on in your organization, then you're done. Inspector will automatically send any findings back up to Security Hub. And so like in this example here, we're looking at 7 different findings in Security Hub that came from Inspector. We've got 4 highs and 3 mediums. And so we have visibility into what's the severity of these findings, what's the actual CVE that it was linked to. And then we have that context data that's super important. Which account is it in? The account's blocked out in this, but there's a column there that says account. Just pretend like you see account numbers in there. Which region and which resource? Is this an ECR image? Is this a Lambda function? Is this an EC2 instance? So we have that details, and then we could click in and see those details and then work them as an incident just like you would in any other Security Hub finding. And then last, we have this view into the SDLC feeding back on itself, right? We've got these generative AI-powered recommendations coming out of Amazon Inspector. In this case, there's a hard-coded secret in some Python code, and Amazon Inspector is proposing this change to your code to replace that with an environment variable to keep the credentials out of your source code. And so now we have, in our operate stage, we're actually generating new code that feedbacks into our create stage so that we can continuously operate our software securely. Okay, so we covered a lot today. We talked about how we want to start the SDLC all the way, we want to start securing the SDLC all the way to the right, as far right as possible, on the developer's workstation. We want to be in the IDE and providing feedback early and often to the developers through Amazon Q Developer so that they have confidence that the code on their laptop is secure. We talked about how we want to then scan after the code leaves the developer's laptop in our CI/CD pipelines against our Git repos using tools like CodeGuru and Amazon Inspector. Inside whatever CI/CD tool we're using, we saw some GitLab today, we saw some GitHub today, and we've talked about the integrations that exist with Code Pipeline. We also then want to continuously scan our software, right? Our SDLC does not end when you deploy it. It's only just getting started, unfortunately. So you've got to continuously scan for vulnerabilities as they continue to be detected, and Inspector then helps provide not just visibility into what those vulnerabilities are, but provides recommendations on how to quickly mitigate those and resolve those through changes to your code. And with that, we've got a little bit of time left, so more than happy to answer some questions in the next 5 minutes.